At InDigital, we know the public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only I3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Here in Greenville County, we have 8 different places where a 911 call can be answered.
It is the largest county in South Carolina. It's a challenge.
The type of information that a telecommunicator gets from Radius Plus is location-based technology. You can see where the caller is, if they have a medical issue, if they speak a different language. They're immediately able to text to that caller in their native language. It reduces response times because it immediately gets first responders where they need to be.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, Rapid Deploy, as well as Carbine, and a big shout out, as always, to patrons. Thank you so very much for everything. We've got some new patrons that have joined in, one of those being Trey. Thank you so much for becoming a supporter and a patron of the podcast, and also for patrons, a perk, as always, new content for audio versions of the DRT, the Dispatchers Roundtable, as well as Open Mic Live, end up going out to patrons to hear. All those videos are out there. However, to listen podcast style, that's a perk for patrons only. So again, thank you so very much for all of that. And it is September 20th. And I think the episode that's going to come on before this is actually going to be with Doug Showalter and Leslie. Both of them, one from Rapid SOS and Doug from Showalter and Company. Both two amazing people, and they are also from We Speak Dispatch, another podcast that talks about a bunch of different topics and scenarios on dispatch. So make sure to check them out. Again, like I said, that episode has aired before this one. And as of right now, though, as I'm talking about this, it hasn't aired yet. It'll air next week, and then this one the following week. But I'm finally catching up, so I'm excited. I'm catching up because I had all these episodes on deck, and they've gone out, and just continue to have more episodes coming, and secret projects that are going through as well that'll be announced as soon as I can. So it's going to be good. Again, I'm excited for all of this. And so you've got other conferences that are going to be coming up. I finished up the Kentucky conference, which was amazing. I did their super session out there. Thank you to the Kentucky Emergency Services Conference for all of that. An excellent time. If you have not gone to the Kentucky conference, make sure to do so. That is an amazing one. And we've got the Michigan conference as well as Gulf Coast out in Alabama. Those are coming up next in October, and excited for those as well. Again, even with all of them, all the conferences that I've been to, if you have not gone to them, you need to check them out because they're really good. So there's a lot of different things that are going to be coming up, as well as new rounds of the Dispatchers Roundtable, and also a few episodes of the Industry Partner Showcase that has gone out there as well. So make sure to check those out. I'm excited today for my guest. We were just talking a moment ago, and I've got notes and everything, her summary, and there's just a lot of stuff that is kind of similar to how I started as well. But, even though there's a lot of incidents that are the same, it's the situation that's always different. And I think that was one of the things that I loved about this job, was that there's always going to be, like a domestic, or, a 911 hang up call, or just any call that comes in to 911. But that situation that's part of that incident is always different, and where they're helping people. So that's always the best part. And I do miss it. I do miss the job. But my guest today is Kallie, and she is a communications officer, as well as training officer and a TAC assistant with New Madrid PD out of Missouri. Hello, hello. How are you today?
I'm good.
All right. Excellent. Now, when we were talking earlier and I asked you about your agency,
Yes.
I had to make sure that I was going to say it right, because it looks like Madrid.
Yes, it does.
And it's Madrid, right?
Yes, New Madrid. Yeah.
Yeah, New Madrid. Okay. Woo! Got it in there. Okay, excellent. So how has everything been going? We've been talking for a little bit here over email, and just in general, how is work going right now?
It's going really well. It is. We're a little short-staffed, but we, go as we deal with it, and it's not been too bad lately.
That is excellent, because there's still so much that's going on, right, in the world, COVID wise.
Yes.
And in some areas you're seeing a resurgent, and in other areas you not only have that's going on, but it's also hurricane season.
Mhm.
So south, there's a lot of stuff that's going on there as well.
Yeah.
So there's just stuff all over the place, and just being short staff, when I switched from dispatch to being an industry partner in 911, we were pretty short staff as well, and that was 2013. But I think it's been like that
Yes.
forever, even more so now.
Yes.
So I want to learn some more about you, as well as your story, and for all of those who are watching and listening right now as well. So I want to know how you got into public safety, but I'm going to jump in right away with a little bit of information, some of the information that you gave me.
Okay.
And you had told me that your mom was a dispatcher as well, right?
Yes. Not for the agency that I work with, but the county just north of us. She dispatched for years. And a lot of the officers that I work with now were officers she worked with. So they kind of watched me grow as I've turned into the person I am, and now the dispatcher that I've become. She dispatched for years, and we would always go up to her office and see her. And it was just something that just amazed me as a little girl, looking at all the screens and hearing everybody and all that. It just intrigued my interest, and it just kind of blossomed from there.
Yeah, and I was going to ask that as well. So it sounds like you remember. So kind of take us back a little bit to that time as a little girl walking in and seeing all this stuff. Like what was that like? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And especially, what are you hearing? Like, are you, listening to calls as well? Or are you just kind of sitting there watching everything go down?
When she worked nights, so when you go in, of course, the lights are usually off and all of that. And she worked in the building that was also held the jail. Mm-hmm. So you would walk in and you would see all of their jail monitors up everywhere. And then she had 3 screens that she would look at that had her 911 console, her NCIC, and then one that had her CAD, her computer aided dispatch. And you would hear all of her radio traffic and all of that. When she dispatched, she still had the pickup phone for 911. She didn't have the computer screen that had the actual headset. Mm-hmm. So, that was one thing. So you got to hear pretty much all of it, because it wasn't something that was in her ears. She had to talk into this microphone on her desk and things like that. So it was one of those things of you'd walk in and the only light in the room would be from these computer screens and maybe a desk lamp so they could see what they were writing. But it just was amazing. I thought it was just the coolest thing ever. Here I am, 4 feet tall, computer screens taller than I am, but it was just something that amazed me. And growing up, my mom either was in public safety of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was an EMT for a while on an ambulance. And my godfather is actually her best friend because they were partners on the rig.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just one of those things. He's now a firefighter, and she's no longer in the profession at all. She's decided to move on to something completely different. And I guess she just got to that point where she was like, I can't take it anymore. And of course, by that point, I was like, I'm ready. I want to go. So I applied for the small department that I was born and raised in, the small little community. Population's like 3,500, and started at the police department doing nothing but answering the desk phone.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe you have a 911 call that the county would transfer to you because it was in your city limits. I talked to 2 officers. The phone would ring maybe twice a night, and still absolutely loved it. So, and then I transferred to a county just south of us, and it's like a whole nother world when you cross the county line.
Well, so let's go back really quick for just a moment. So she ends up going out of it, and you're ready to jump in,
Mm-hmm.
and you're telling me about this call volume and everything. So what was it like? I guess because you were 18, right?
Yes.
When you jumped in. Okay, so what was that difference from when you saw it as a little girl to then being 18? Was it still like fascinating, or like was there any differences that you noticed from being a kid and now as a perspective as an adult?
Absolutely fascinating. I thought it was so cool. And even though the department that I worked at has 1 computer screen and 1 radio, and that was it. And talking to the officers that have watched me grow over the years and have literally known me since diapers, and being able to help people in the community that I directly lived in my entire life it was fascinating to me. I absolutely loved it. Even though it was something as small as maybe 1 or 2 calls a day, I absolutely loved it.
So as a place that you grew up in and all, what was that like? Especially as, being 18, you're an adult, but, still young, going into this.
Yeah.
And, you're dealing with lives, but also in an area that you grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking calls possibly from people that you know. What was that like?
It was scary at first.
Mm-hmm.
You were scared that every time you pick up the phone, it may be your grandmother who lived across town, or, somebody that you're entirely close with. And it got hard the first time I lost somebody that I knew. Nothing that we could have done. It was an elderly female. She just happened to pass away in her sleep. She was somebody that I knew my entire life, somebody that was a big part of my life. It hurt. But then all you can do is, well, I'm going to try to do my best before she's completely taken away from the town completely. So I'm going to try my best. I'm going to get officers there to make sure they comfort the family because I want to be able to help comfort them.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to send the officers that I sent. And then, we would call the ambulance district because the police department that I worked with, the county has all of the fire and ambulances. So I called the county, told them the coroner, who was actually the fire chief, went. And so, small town communities, we tried our best to do what I could. I couldn't change the outcome, but I could at least help make it a little easier.
Do you remember what that was like, further on? Like, were there any people there who almost kind of like a debriefing type thing where they came in and asked, also basically asking you if you are okay because you knew this person? Did anybody know that you knew this person?
Oh, yes. She was one of those pillars of the community that everybody knew, everybody loved.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things of after the officers clear the scene, they'd come back and sit in the office with me, and we all just kind of have to decompress. We would talk about different stories that we had with her, things like that. It was definitely one of those things. And then, of course, as a department, we would go visit the family, go to the funeral, things like that. So, that's one thing that I loved about the small town community that I worked in originally to start out with, because I did have that support for those calls that I wasn't used to and I was learning to deal with. I did have the officers that supported me and kind of knew the same thing, because the officers that I worked with weren't much older than I was.
Mm-hmm.
So that also helped because we grew up together. We knew how we could feel each other's emotions and things like that. So that was one thing that I loved about the small community that I started in.
It's probably one of the best ways to get into public safety, right? Is to come into it the way you did, and to have grown up with a lot of the officers, but also officers that worked with your mom,
Mm-hmm.
because they're already like your second family, right? But
Yes.
in this scenario, it's even more so because you've been with them for so long, and for them to be able to come in and also talk to you about that and
Mm-hmm.
relate, and then do things with the community, like you said, go to the funeral and everything else. That has got to be probably one of the best scenarios, because like when I first started, I didn't know any of those the officers or anyone that worked with, not until I worked with them for a long time, of course. But I wasn't able to go in knowing who they were. So like when there would be hard calls, it was just me. And the training at the time, there was no training there on how really on how to take care of ourselves, or how it would be like to deal with some of these hard calls, early on. Now this is 2001 that I'm talking, and it was really just you're going to the next call. So to be able to decompress with them there and actually get some of that closure and healing in that sense, man, that's a good scenario right there.
Yeah, it was.
So you go through all of this there, and well, so let me go back. Let's start with this. How many people were working at a time when you were at this department that you started out at?
I was the only dispatcher, and I had 2 officers. That was it.
How many hours? Was it 8 hours?
12-hour shifts.
Oh, it was 12 hours?
Yes.
Oh man.
Every department I worked with was worked 12-hour shifts.
Nice. So okay, and the reason I ask is when I started out, small department, I can't even remember. I think there might have been 4 of us dispatchers for the police department, and it was one person per shift, but it was 8 hours, and I think we had maybe 12 sworn officers, and that's including the sergeant, lieutenant, and the chief.
Yeah, that's how the department that I worked at was.
Yeah.
We had the 4 of us that would cover the 48-hour period span, and then we'd have 2 officers a shift, and then the captain would actually work one of the road shifts, and then the chief would be there Monday through Friday, unless somebody called in, and then he would be on the road.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we basically worked the same way then. Yeah, because the chief was there all week. However, it seemed like it was even more so because he didn't live that far from the police department, and he would have the scanner on all the time.
Yes.
And I would look outside sometimes, and I would see him pull up, and I would just wave, and he would wave. I'm like, "What are you doing?" Like, "Oh, just just checking out the city, just making sure everything is good."
Yep.
But he's awesome. He still lives in the area and stuff, and he was always really cool. So you go through there. I mean, what was the training like? Because you've got you do have kind of some experience coming into this, because you were going there all the time to visit your mom.
It really did help, because the thing that I had was I went in and I sat with the head dispatcher, who of course I've known my whole life, and I sat there and watched for a couple of days on the different things. But that was one thing of, our alphabet, it's the Adams, Boy, Charles, all that. I already knew that.
Yeah.
And that was something that I didn't have to learn. I knew most of the 10 codes that we use in the area. So that was helpful, because when they key up on the radio, I knew what they were saying. I didn't have to be like, wait, what was that? I knew. So that was helpful. And with the small department that I worked in, we didn't have a whole lot of 911 calls. Every now and then the county would transfer one down for a domestic or something like that. The only time we would actually get the 911 calls directly to us was if they called from a landline. And half the time then usually it was an elderly person within an ambulance. And we would either transfer it to the county, or we would take the information and call the county ourselves. So it was just one of those things of, I knew how to handle those calls fairly quickly, because that was really the only thing that we had. So I sat there and I trained and observed for a few days. The 3rd day I walked in, she said, "Here you go. Here's a headset. Good luck. I'm going to sit over here in the back, but I'm not here." So
oh man,
I sat over sat in dispatch, and it wasn't bad. The officers, of course, knew I was training. I was the new girl there. I didn't know much about the system that we used to run our tags and things. So they were slow. They were patient. They were understanding. And over the next couple weeks, I was perfectly fine with it. And I was completely released to the terminal after 3 weeks.
Oh, man. 3 weeks? That is excellent. Now, when you say the terminal, for those who are listening, because there's a lot of people who listen that are from the general public as well. When you say terminal, if you can explain that for those who might not know.
So what we consider a terminal at our agencies and the agencies that I've worked for is it's the actual desk that the dispatcher sits at. It has our radios, our computers for our CAD and our national database, and usually our 911 calling. So that's pretty much it. The department that I worked at was actually at the very front of the police department. We had a window and we talked to the general public. So we were also kind of like that person there that they would take contact with. The probation and parole officer was also housed in the department. So if you worked days, you also had these people coming in. I need to see so-and-so for my PMP. And you're like, oh, okay. Have a seat. I'll tell her you're here. And so we were kind of a little bit of everything. We were the administration part. We were the public relations part of the front, along with handling our radio. So
that makes it even more interesting sometimes, right? Because our small police department, it was the same way. Like, people could walk into the little lobby area, and then there was me, and there was glass. However, it was easy enough for somebody to walk in and just see me right there. And we had the little dip in on the top of the counter where, because we would do like bicycle tags and stuff, because there's a lot of lakes around the area. So they would put stuff under there, or they would come in to pay like a fix-a-ticket or something. But the glass, it wasn't all the way up. It was just glass that went across. And I remember asking, I think it might have been the lieutenant or something, one of them, and I said, so what happens if somebody comes in and they're disgruntled and they like reach over with a gun or a weapon or something? And I remember they kind of chuckled and was like, well, you better move fast. I was like, okay.
We had a huge window. It was a huge window that took up half the wall. And we had the dip for where they put in money and stuff for bonds and things like that. And then there's this little circle right here, that middle of it, where they could talk to. And I was like, what if they come in at me? They're like, you better dunk. You better get under the table. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. you better be the Flash and just start moving, because that's
now,
all we got.
Have the luxury of the window being tinted. So they couldn't really see in unless they were peeping through this hole that they're supposed to walk through. But a lot of people did. You'd see an eyeball and you're like, oh, hi, can I help you?
Oh, man. Yeah. Yeah. Somebody could easily walk in and just throw something over the little glass where I was at. And it was always, it was kind of funny when some people would come in. But it was interesting to face the public that way as well. But also, when you're the only person who's working, there are times when you have to go use the restroom, and what happens? Like, how did that work for you? You take a radio, right?
Well, we did. We had, when I started dispatching, we did have the radio that had the battery pack and the headset. Mm-hmm. So I could take it and talk to them just fine. If the landline rang, you're just like, hang on, don't hang up. I'll be right there. Don't hang up.
Right.
But most of the time, because I did work night shift at that department, the officers were in and out, because we are a small community, and there's not a lot that goes on. It's one of those things of, you have a small little few things, but if something happens, it's something big. And so every now and then the officers would come in. I'm like, hey, sit here for a minute. I'll be right back. So then I didn't have to worry about too much about the radio, and the officers all knew how to make a card to start their incident if they needed to. And they would take the call, and then you come back and you're like, where did they go? And you look on your computer screen and you're like, oh, okay.
Yes, self-dispatch, yeah.
Or you hear them yell at you while they're walking down the hallway, hey, we're going to so-and-so. Okay. Good job.
Yeah, that was always good to have somebody come in and to have them sit there, because it was the same with us as well. They knew how to run certain things that were there. They didn't know how to do the CAD, but they would just write stuff down and then split if they needed to and yell the same thing. But I remember there were a couple times where I would call them out on the radio and tell them that I'm going to be 10-7 down the hall, and it's just out of service down the hall because I'm using the restroom.
Yeah,
and then come out and go to say that I was back in service, and there is someone from the public standing right there, and all I could think was, God, I hope they didn't hear me.
Yeah. Yeah, we did have our doorbell on the front door, so you could at least hear it down the hallway when somebody walked in the front door. So,
Oh man. Yeah, this front door was always open. There was, if I remember correctly, there wasn't even a lock on it. It was just, well, the front door, the one going into where I was at in the back, that one definitely was secured and stuff. But otherwise, nope. There'd be someone standing there, and I'd walk out, and they'd say, "You all right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I was just down the hall a minute. How can I help you?"
yeah, yeah.
So awkward. So you end up moving from that department over to the county. Now, one of the things that, and I think I kind of mentioned this already, but one of the things that stuck out to me was that, especially because I can relate to you from going from a small department to the county, the call volume. So you go from 2 to 3 calls in a shift, even at night, and at nighttime, there's a lot of stuff that happens.
Yeah.
But giving the area that you were in and how big it was and all, you were still only getting like 2 to 3 calls. But now you go to the county and you're getting tons of calls. The
Yeah.
call volume is different. What was that like for you in that difference going from
Well,
that type of call volume to the next?
I started on a weekend, Labor Day
Oh,
weekend.
great.
Yeah,
Oh,
Labor
even
Day
on the
weekend.
Labor Day.
And it was one of those things of I went to apply to the county because I was technically part time at the department that I worked at,
Hmm.
but I was working through one of our workers' maternity leaves, so I was there full time. Well, then I was like, I really like this. I think I want to do something that's a little bit more because I would be sitting at night. So I'm like, can y'all go run traffic? Like, where there's nothing going on. And so I applied to the agency just south of us, the county just south of us. Portersville, that I worked at originally, was right at the county line. So I worked at the county just south of us. And I put in my application, and they were like, cool, come this weekend. I'm like, okay, thinking I'm going to walk into a training. I did not. I walked in, and they're like, here's your headset. There was 2 of us at that department. We had 2 dispatchers at a time. Always. If somebody called out, somebody else had to come in. We could not handle the county by ourselves.
Yeah.
So the other dispatcher was one that's been there for 6, 7 years. She was sitting over there, and she was like, you know how to work, you know how to do it. It's just going to be getting used to the call volume. And I didn't think it would be that bad of a difference, but it was outrageous. We went from not enough officers, not enough deputies, not enough anybody to handle stuff. And I'm like, this is unreal. And I knew the call volume was going to be more because it was going to a county
Hmm.
and not just a small city. But then I'm like, it's a whole different world. Because then you walk into this dispatch and there's 7 screens per person. And you're like, oh, okay. You get all the 911 calls. You can't even transfer them. You're it. You're the only dispatch center in the entire county. You handle all of the fire departments, all of the police departments, all of it. And you go from 2 or 3 calls a night to, I went to days and I started handling, and I want to say we took 75 to 80 a day. And I'm like, oh. And of course, my partner that day, she goes to the bathroom. It was around noon, and the 911 starts ringing, and you answer it, and it's a major accident on one of our major highways. And she comes back from the bathroom, and by that time, I have deputies and an ambulance and a helicopter on the ground. She was like, I was gone for 5 minutes. I was like, yeah, it kind of hit the fan when you left.
Oh
Hey.
man.
She was like, well, you handled it very well. And I was like, I'm panicking, but I'm glad you think so.
Right? I'm glad you were able to go to the bathroom. I
Yes.
just went through hell.
Yes, exactly. Like, you walked out and like they knew, and they're like, let's really test the new girl. And I was like, great.
It seems to happen that way, right? When you're first starting out, and especially like for me, I had my first big like high priority call my first day off of training. So it was going to be the first day after training and everything, and I had this call that sticks with me till today. And for you, you're new there, and then bam, dispatch gods are like, welcome.
Yes, and like we have the bat phones for the 2 helicopter in the district, and we had them at the department I started with. I never touched them. I knew that if I picked it up, somebody would say, "Hey, this is so and so." But then I'm like, I have to answer. I have to talk to people. What do I say? How do I word this? So I was like, I hung up the phone. I was like, I'm sure I sounded like a complete idiot, but they're on the way. They'll be there in a minute. So it was definitely a change. And it was just a constant fast pace all the time, 24/7. And we also ran the front half of the Justice Center that we were in. Because the Justice Center that we were in, we had 115 bed inmates in the back. Then we had dispatch in the sheriff's office was all in the front, along with the Division II court. So all of those doors we had to open in the front. We were the main console for the jail system completely. So if that way the jail got overtook in the back, we took controls. They couldn't go anywhere.
Right.
So we still had to open all of those doors and deal with people in the front for their visits and all that with the inmates in the back, along with 911 call taking, all of it.
What the hell?
It was definitely a change of pace, wholeheartedly, entirely. So,
yeah, especially if there's only two of you.
There's two of us
who are there running it all.
During the week, there would be a third person that we called the hallway position because she was in the hallway on the side. She did have access to 911, the radios, and all that, but she did most of our paperwork. Like when warrants would come across, ex partes, like that. That's what she did solely. And then if we were super busy, because each of the departments that I worked for had their own radio station. And half the time they wouldn't have it on scan, so they wouldn't know if the city across the county is talking because they're talking. So sometimes, even though there is two of us, there's 3 or 4 people talking, and you're like, I know you know that these other people are talking. Hang on a minute. So he was helpful during the day a lot because sometimes it would be, we're dealing with the deputy on this channel, and my partner's dealing with one of the city officers, and then another officer down in one of the smaller cities is talking, and we're like, we can't get you. You're going to have to hang on a minute. And she'd key up over, and we're like, thank the Lord.
Oh, wow. So, okay. So let me ask this. So you end up going to the county. You've got this crazy call volume, all the stuff that's going on and all. Were there ever any times where like you called your mom and were like, you know, this is so different, and maybe called, and even just a vent, you know, or some advice or anything? Did you ever make any calls to your mom because she'd been doing it for so long?
Yes. The agency that I worked with was actually a 40-minute drive from where I lived because their dispatch was in the center of the county. Mm-hmm. So it was actually about a 30, 35, 40-minute drive, depending on how bad the interstate was that morning. And that drive home was really when I got to like decompress before I got home because I had 4 kids at home. Mm-hmm. So before I got home, I didn't want to take it into my kids. I didn't want to do anything like that. So that's when I called my mom. And I'm like, Mom. And the county that I worked in, we had an unusually, surprisingly to me, high volume of sex crime cases. A lot against kids. And that really affected me personally because sometimes these kids were the same age as my baby at home. Mm-hmm. And so when I started dispatching at the county, I had 2. I had a 2-year-old and a newborn. And so when you deal with these kids during the day, like it really affected me. And I was like, I don't know. Like these are hard. And we had an infant loss one day. It was a natural thing. It was SIDS or whatever. But it really affected me. It was really hard. And I called my mom and I was like, you know, I'm trying to deal with this mother who's on 911 bawling. And we didn't have an ambulance district of our own. We had a private ambulance that supplied for the county. So my partner's on the phone with them trying to get them there. And of course, the deputies and the city officers, they're all going out there. We're trying to get first responders there. And I was like, it was one of those things that I wanted to put all of my focus in that one call. But at the same time, I still had other officers in other towns talking. And it was one of those things of like, I don't know if I can handle this much at one time. Mm-hmm. Because then my partner ended up taking a 911 call, and it was a major accident on the interstate. So then I also have to continue to try to calm this mother down, getting a deputy there. And my partner's sending an ambulance for this wreck, and so I have to contact the highway patrol. So I'm on the radio talking to the highway patrol about this 1050, and I was like, I don't know if I can handle all of it at the same time. I don't know if I'm going to be able to. And my mom's favorite quote was, there's no crying in dispatch. You can cry in the hallway, you can cry in the bathroom, you're not crying in dispatch. Don't do it. So, you know, it was one of those things of you're trying to keep it together. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle all of this at the same time. I don't know if I can do it. And my mom was like, well, if you can't do it, you can't do it. There's no reason in forcing yourself or hurting your mental health because you're at a job that you don't want to get out of. Mm-hmm. So I went back the next day, and I was okay. I went home and hugged my baby and, made sure he was perfectly fine that night. No blankets, no nothing. I didn't want to even risk it. And went back the next morning and found out I still loved it. I still loved the chaos. I was still hoping for something. And so it was one of those things that I was like, okay, maybe I can handle the different call volume. Maybe I can do it. And it's one of those, if I had a rough day or there was even a situation at work and I didn't know what to do with it, I would call my mom in the middle of the day. I'm like, Mom, me or her have no idea what we're going to do. And my mom would always have some sort of piece of advice or, well, I don't know, maybe call the highway patrol. Maybe they'd be able to help you a little more, or hang on a second. She'd always seem to find an answer for it. And it definitely helped having somebody who'd been through some of the similar stuff, who was always there to let me vent and would kind of understand. So it was nice.
Yeah, it's always good to have someone who understands. And even though your mom was out of it, she's still technically answering the call, answering your call, and helping out. And, to have all that experience as well and just let you know that it's okay. And if you feel like you can't do it, then, don't force it, which is, excellent advice. But the good thing is that you went back the next day as well. There's a lot of people that I've spoken to over the time that I've done this podcast where they have said they had a hard call and they decided to go back, and they were so glad that they did go back the next day or whenever the next shift was, because they felt though as if they had not gone back when they did, they might not have gone back at all.
Yes. Yeah, that was one of those times I was like, well, I don't, because the next morning I was getting ready and I was like, I don't know if I can handle another day like that. And I was like, I'm going to go and I'm going to, Mama didn't raise a quitter. We got to try again. And I absolutely loved it.
It's funny. It's funny that you say that, because I joke with my kids sometimes when they say they can't do something, and this I can't take credit for. It was a comedian. I think it was like George Lopez who said this, but I said to them, jokingly say to them, well, you're a Mexican, not a Mexicant. and they're always like, okay, Dad, nice dad joke. I'm like, oh, I can't take credit for that. It was from a comedian, but it's just funny. You say you can do it. You just got to try or try to figure out a different way to do it. And if, it turns out after trying again that it's not for you, then, then you can find something else. But as long as you go back and try it again, a lot of times it ends up working out. Mm-hmm. How do you think, and I ask this because how you talk about your children and stuff in this call as well, but how do you think this job has changed you? Because you've been doing this for how many years now?
Going on 6.
6 years. So how do you think it has changed you? And the reason I ask is especially with calls that have to do with kids. Here's an example. My youngest, who is 5, she was kind of playing around with her fork, mm-hmm. and I told her not to. And one of the older kids was like, what's the deal? I was like, well, for one, it's dangerous, but 2, I took a phone call where a kid was, and I didn't go into detail with them, but I'll go into detail here. There was a kid who was running with a fork and had tripped, and it got, lodged in the roof of their mouth. Mm-hmm. And the kid ended up being okay. But because of that specific call, like whenever my kids are messing with silverware and stuff like that, I go back to that call and I'm like, I just want you to be safe, okay?
Yes.
Just quit messing with the silverware.
I always said growing up that I wasn't going to be that mom that was overbearing on her children. And, as long as you're putting your seatbelt on, I'm okay. I won't leave the driveway unless the chest clip is where I think the chest clip needs to go. Because we've had infants and children that have died simply because the chest clip had slid down. And my kids know that when they get in the car and I look up and see that they've moved their chest clip, I'm like, can you fix it, please? Because it's not okay. Or the jumping out of trees. We all played in trees. We all jumped out of trees. We all risked it. But my kids are extra sometimes, and they want to try the most daredevil things. And I'm like, can you stop? And they're like, Mom, we're just trying to play. I know, but what if you land just the right way on your neck, like that one little boy Mommy had to deal with? And it's affected me as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, my child is almost 7 years old, and I just now let her out of the 5-point harness. So, it's just one of those things where I'm like, I don't know. So it has affected me as a parent, but it's also made me extremely grateful for my children every day, even though they're on my last nerve. I
Right.
feel incredibly grateful for them because I still have them. So
It really it really puts life into perspective as well, right? Like you're able to reflect on a lot of the calls that you've taken, but also for anything that's going on in your life. Sometimes you realize what I might be going through isn't that bad after all, because there are so many other people out there that are dealing with other things that are going on, or even some of the calls that you take, your own life experience allows you to help that person who's calling so much better than anybody else, any of your partners who might have taken the call, because they don't have that experience.
Yes, and I did have a call one day of a dad called. He was at work at a factory in the state just south of us because we were at the state line.
Mm-hmm.
He called and he was like, "My son's called and said that his mother's chasing him through a field with a stun gun." And I'm like, "Ooh, okay." Well, my partner gets the kid's phone number and I call, and I have that thing. I'm young, so sometimes I sound like I'm 5. Sometimes I can sound like a kid on the phone and on the radio. And so I call this boy, and he's 8, 9 years old. The mom answers. I sound young enough. I'm like, I'm just trying to get a hold of him for homework or whatever. The boy takes the phone, takes off. As a mom, my mom kicked in. And I was, what's your name? How old are you? I've got kids. I'm a mama. And I sat on the phone with that little boy until the deputy got there. And, I told him my name. We talked about things he liked in school or whatever, because he had ran across a field through a irrigation ditch on the other side, completely away from his mother. And,
Oh, wow.
I'm like, don't go over there, because the mom and the boyfriend were there. And I was like, don't go over there. You stay there. The deputy will come to you. I don't want you to. And my partner, she's not a mom. She wasn't a mom. And she was like, how did you knew the right things to say. And I was like, I think it's because of, I'm a kid. I'm a mom. I'm a kid too. So like, I know what somebody would want to say to me in a situation like that. And the kid also thought it was incredibly cool because the deputy drove his truck through the field to get him. And to this day, that little boy still knows my name. I had to go to court because he name dropped me in his interview. Oh. And so, it's little things like that have made a difference and helped me. And I also think being a mom has helped me because I knew how to handle situations differently. Because if you don't have kids, sometimes you don't know what to say or how to say it. So being a mom has definitely helped me with things like that, in my opinion.
That's awesome. Yeah, because there's definitely things in that we've gone through in life that help. With you, it's being a mom and having having children and stuff, and being able to talk to kids. And you're right, there are some times when we're taking phone calls and we're dealing with kids, and but not just kids, like anyone really, when it's taking long for an officer to get out there, not because they're just taking long, they're probably far away in a different township or something like that, or EMS, or not all the time fire, sometimes fire, if they're already outside of the house or whatever's going on, and they want you to stay in the line with them.
Yeah.
You have to figure out, that's one of the biggest things, because, we're there talking to people all day, but you have to come up with some sort of filler, so to speak, to be able to keep them calm as well.
Yes, absolutely. It's one of those things of sometimes you just have to talk to people. Mm-hmm. Because they may be separated from their abusive boyfriend, but they don't feel safe enough to completely hang up the phone. And you can tell them all the time, that's fine. You can call me back if something changes. And they're like, I'd rather not. So then you kind of laugh, because then you become a therapist, because then you have to just sit there and talk. And there's been suicidal subjects that I've done that with and talked to, and we ended up getting them an ambulance before they hurt themselves. But there's always those that don't want to listen either. So I mean, it's just one of those things of sometimes you have suicidal people that you can't stop. They're completely made their decision up. Like the instance that I worked through, he had his decision made. He just wanted us to make sure that everything was cleaned up before his kids got home. So, it was just one of those situations.
And that's the one that you were telling me that really kind of shook you from the inside, right?
Yes. It was my first day back from maternity leave. I had just came back. We did shift change at 7. We did 7 to 1900. And it was 7:05 and the phone rang. I wasn't even completely logged into my Windows. And, it came from a house phone, so I knew where he was. And it was one of those things because it threw me off because I could remember almost the entire call word for word. And when you have somebody who calls and says, is this a recorded line? Something's off. Something's weird. And, so I tell my partner, hey, go on and start the city cars towards this address. I don't know what's going on, but something's not right. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm sitting there and I'm talking to him and he gives me the password to his gun safe and the password to his cell phone. And I'm like, something's not right. This is not going to go okay. And, and he's like, tell him I just shot myself. And I'm like, let's talk about this. What's going on? What's wrong? And he even got annoyed with me. He said, listen, I was like, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. And it didn't matter what I said. He laid the phone down and you hear the gunshot and you hear him death rattle into the phone until the officers get there. And it was one of those calls that shook me from the inside. Because I heard his last breath on the phone. Mm-hmm. The officers get there and they're like, all the doors are locked. And I'm like, he's no longer breathing. So they kick in the door and you hear them kick in the door and then you hear them come into the room and I hang up the phone. And I looked at my partner and I said, I need a minute. And I got up and I walked out and I sat outside for, 5-6 minutes. Come back in, compose myself, and then because even though I worked at the county, we were still very close to the deputies that we worked with because we had maybe one at a time for the whole county. The city in which the sheriff's office was, the city officers were up there all the time, so we were close as well. And we all pretty much stayed on the same side of the schedule. We worked together. I had my set of officers for this place. The other shift had theirs. It worked the same way. So the officers that we worked with every day were the only officers we worked with. So they're all calling and are you okay? Are you sure? Because they're like, that's difficult. And when it first happened, I didn't think it was a gunshot. It sounded like a rustle in a pocket, like potato chips rustled in a pocket. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't know what that was. Well, then they're pull up the recording later to try to burn it off for evidence. And they're like, it was, but it was just so loud the phone didn't catch it. And it was so hard for me to grasp that I couldn't have done anything else. I did my best. And it was hard. It was difficult. And it was one of those that I cried the entire way home that night. And it was one of those that you wake up in the middle of the night from nightmares from, because that's all you hear is that man's voice over and over and over again. And, there's still days that I can hear it clear as day, like he's the one still on the phone. And it's one of those that it made me question if I was even going to continue. It wasn't the call volume. It was, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Mm-hmm. Because growing up, I've always struggled with anxiety and things like that. And I was like, I don't know if I can put myself through that. But then, the department that I worked for, we did have a chaplain that we could go and talk to. And the department that I work at now does too. And I went to him and I talked to him and I was like, look, I'm struggling. It's hard. And he was like, you tried and you did all you could. He was like, if you listen back to that tape, he was like, you'll hear he put your phone down. You couldn't have said anything to make him stop. You got them there as soon as you could. You had your partner sending them, the officers, as soon as you realized something was off because of the way he was talking and what he was saying. You did all you could. You couldn't change the outcome. He was completely set on his decision. And he was like, but think about the people that have called with the same kind of thing that you have talked to and have distracted until somebody got there or talked to and changed their minds. And I was like, that's true. I have helped more people than I think I helped. Mm-hmm. because sometimes I don't notice that because I kept them on the phone, they didn't hurt themselves. And so it was one of those calls that sticks to me to this day, and one of those calls that I talk about openly now, but it took me years. I mean, my child that I just came off maternity leave, she turned 3 this year, and I'm just now, the past year or so, able to talk about it without almost breaking down. It's also one of those calls that I have a copy of, and I use in my training because, sometimes it's something simple as that of, is this a recorded line? Something's not going to be right. Sometimes your gut feeling is more important than following a necessary line of questions. I didn't know what was wrong with him, but something was wrong and I could feel it. So I'm going to go ahead and send somebody and we'll go from there. And so it was just one of those calls that have stuck with me. And I play it in training because I'm like, if you can't handle it or not okay to talk to somebody about it, now's going to be the time. This is a real call. It's not something that you just see on YouTube or anything like that. It's a real call. I took it. That's my voice. That's somebody in the community that we live in that, you think, oh, well, that doesn't happen around here. It does. It does a lot, especially holidays. We call it suicide season because, you're alone. Right. The call volume for suicidal subjects goes up incredibly. And it's one of those that it affected me as a person. It affected me as a dispatcher. But it's also one of those of, I couldn't help it. I did what I could do. And that's one of those things of that I think people in this profession have to come to the acceptance of is sometimes we do all we can. We can't affect the outcome sometimes. So it's also one of those things that's been a very big part of my career. So.
Wow. I love that you're able to talk about it now. I think that's one of the biggest things is, the more we talk about some of the, some of the calls that have had such impact on us, the first step is actually, doing that, getting help, but also, sharing that story. That's that first step. And then as you continue to share and really kind of break it down, right? You're able to manage it, whatever impact it had, you're able to manage it. And you put it into training, which is great. I think also one of the biggest things is that, we always blame ourselves, right? Because I can only imagine that one of the reasons that it also stuck with you so much, more so in the beginning than now, because now it's more of a training aspect, right? Yeah. And you understand it a lot more and you were able to process it better. But in the beginning, maybe the impact was more because you couldn't do more. So you were kind of, maybe blaming yourself a little bit. And I say that because I had a similar call where I was blaming myself, but it came to the realization that there was nothing I could do. I had done everything I could.
Yes. And that's one of the things is it's one of those of, and I've recently trained 2 people for this department that I'm at now, and I play it. And I'm like, it's not from anybody here. It's not from somebody that you may know. Mm-hmm. It is somebody because he does identify himself for me. I'm like, it's not anybody that you're going to know. It's somebody from an agency I previously worked at, but it's something that you very well may answer the phone for. And I'm like, and it's one of those things of, I know, because the 2 people that I've trained are younger. They're closer to my age. The girl's actually, the one that I just trained, she's younger than me. Mm-hmm. So she's the age I was when I started. So I'm like, it's going to be hard. And it's going to be one of those things of, I don't know if I can do this or not. I was like, so, we're going to listen to this and we're going to see. And it's going to probably affect you because you're going to hear it. I mean, it's all right here on the line. It's here. I was like, but it's something that you will deal with every day. It may be the next phone call. And, they listen to it and they're like, that really happens? Like, it's not just on TV. I'm like, no, it really happens. It really happens. And it's just something that you have to feel comfortable with talking to somebody, whether it be your partner or a different coworker, our chief, our super, all of our supervisors are super, we're a close department here as well. I was like, you can talk to any of us. And I was like, and I know, because we're the youngest ones, the next ones are in their 40s, 50s. So, sometimes it's easier to talk to somebody closer to your age than it is somebody who's older. And I was like, we're all here for each other because we've all taken at some point a call that stuck with us, that's affected us in a certain way. And, so it's one of those things that I'm able to use it as a teaching source at this point, and I'm glad for it. And I'm glad that it's helped prepare them because the girl, she did train, and she's released to the terminal. She's been on the terminal for a few months, and she had a kid, a 16-year-old, who was threatening suicide. And, she could tell something was off, and she told me it was because the way that you could feel it. She was like, and I know you told me to trust my gut, and the way she was talking was kind of weird. And so I went with it, and I talked to her, and they distracted her long enough to get an ambulance to her. And she was like, but that call, the way you were talking to him and the way you were trying just to distract him, simply, not necessarily comfort him or change his mind, but just distract him. She was like, it reminded me of that, and I was able to use that as, kind of a way to cope with this call. And I was like, I was real skeptical, and if I even wanted to play it, because I'd have to listen to it over and over and over.
Right.
And I was like, I didn't know if I even wanted to use it, if I wanted to talk about it, if I want to do anything. But then it's little things like that where I'm like, I'm kind of glad that I'm able to talk about it. I'm glad that I'm able to use it as the source like that, because we're young. Sometimes we don't think that stuff that's on TV happens in the small communities we're in.
So with this call, did this happen before or after you went into, becoming a training officer?
Well, the training officer's actually been since the beginning of this year. So this was at the department I worked for before. So when I came here, it was one of those things of this. I started working part-time here because being a single mom, you need all the money you can get. And I had 3 kids at home, and I was just needing some extra money. This department is 5 minutes from home. It's the county in which I've grown in, the county that I've known like the back of my hand. And even though I had come to love the county I worked with down south, this was home. It was the county I worked in. I was able to help people back within my own community like I did at the department I worked for originally. And so when I came here as a part-time dispatcher, I was working 12 straight days before I had a weekend off. And I also learned that I absolutely love what I do. I like every aspect of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And so I ended up taking a full-time position here almost 2 years to the dot ago. This agency doesn't have the same call volume. The call volume is slightly smaller. So, I kind of went down, but also gained fire and EMS, because the fire departments down in the other counties, some of them had their own 24-hour firefighter who paged about themselves. So here I'm entirely it. I am police, fire, and EMS wholeheartedly. And, I kind of liked that part, because then the ambulance district at this county south of us was privately owned. So they kind of did things their own way. Sometimes they would take a transfer and we would be short for the county. So EMS here, I liked it because we had plenty of ambulances for the county, and I controlled where they went. So it was one of those things that I absolutely loved it. And I've worked here for 2 years now, but the experiences that I got at the county south of me have helped me incredibly. The county south of me, we worked homicides like a regular basis. Somebody call and say that they'd killed so-and-so or whatever. It wasn't an, oh my goodness kind of response. It was, dang, it had been a week since the last one. And it was just one of those things of the crime rate down south is incredibly higher than the crime rate for the county I'm in now. And homicides were something that I learned to deal with. And the county I worked at, we even had inmate escape. So I had to deal with that. And, it was one of those things of, we made national news for our 2 inmates that escaped out of our jail.
Oh, geez.
And I'm like, that's some experiences that other dispatchers who have even been here for years don't have. They've not had to deal with it. And that's one part of the job that I always tell people, sometimes it's not about how long you've been doing it. It's about what you've done in your years. So, handling homicides, sexual assaults, things like that, it's no big deal for me. I pretty much know questions that need to be asked that are important, more that are not, that are more important, things like that. And it's affected the way I do my job. And, some people that I work with, they haven't dealt with that many. I mean, they've dealt with some, and they've dealt with some that are horrible, but they haven't done with it in the amount that some other people have worked here have. So, it's different experiences that I think have helped me and helped where I can prepare other people because I've dealt with it. And I tell them all the time, I can tell you how to deal with it every day, all day, but each call is different.
Yeah.
Just because I teach you how to deal with it doesn't mean that you're not going to have to adapt when the phone line goes active. So, it's just one of the things. And as I'm on days. I've worked my way from nights to days here. And then I got to where new hires were coming in and they were like, hey, you're going to sit with her. And I'm like, hey, I'm Kallie. How are you? And we'd sit there and they'd train for a couple weeks on the terminal with me. They wouldn't even have like a training course. And then here you go. Good luck. And so now that they've actually made the training officer position, there's a PowerPoint that I walk through to teach them step by step for the CAD system, step by step on how to use, because we're paperless. So step by step on how to use the system we use for our warrants, ex partes, things like that. Step by step on how to use our mapping system, because it can be difficult some days. So we have about a week and a half worth of stuff that we learned back here in the classroom. And then we go to the terminal and they sit and they plug in with their little umbilical cords, as I call them, to our radios. And they sit there and they observe for a week or so. And then after a week or so, then I put it to where they're going to start talking on their 911 lines. Then they get the battery pack and I get the umbilical cord. And, they're running it. I'm still there. I can still talk. I can still take over if I need to. But they're doing it. They're hands-on in it. And I think that's one thing that has helped more than my training of, here you go. Because we have so much time that I make sure that they are at least comfortable. And we have a training system of our CAD that they can log into anywhere. So they can go home and practice in the CAD to make sure that they're comfortable with it. Because sometimes CAD and being able to log things accurately in a timely manner is more important than something else. So, and it's one thing. And right now, I'm the only dispatcher on my shift. I handle the entire county by myself. And sometimes it gets overwhelming trying to train somebody. And you're like, I know I'm trying to show you, but right now I need to do it because I'm on the terminal and I'm the only one here. My partner's she's not here. I don't have a partner. And, because we're short staffed and we're just, it is what it is. Those that are veteran dispatchers, we have to sometimes work by ourselves. And sometimes it can be chaotic. And I'm incredibly grateful that our officers are cross-trained. So, my officer that I have during the day, he comes in and can help me if I'm busy. And he doesn't even ask sometimes. Sometimes he just shows up, sits down, puts on his headset, and goes with it. And I'm incredibly grateful for it. Or if he knows that I'm busy and he can hear I give out a domestic and tell him that I'm still 1012 on 911, if somebody else says something, he'll answer them from the car. He'll key up on his radio 10-4, and, we roll with it.
That's awesome.
And it's just one of those things of we have a mobile CAD, so they can log stuff themselves. So sometimes they're helpful and they do it themselves. And it's one of those things of when the new people came in, they were like, oh my, this is a lot. I mean, it can be, but it's not horrible. It's not horrible once you get used to it. It just looks incredibly overwhelming.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it looks like you're running all of NASA.
Yes.
And all and confusing, but yeah, once you start getting into it, it's just one more thing that you're working through. It's just those people don't have that experience, and I think it's awesome that you turned all of your experience, everything that you've gone through during this time, and have added that into this position where you're at as well now. For training, and I can only imagine that not just that experience, but also growing up with it, you wanted to be able to kind of mold those that are coming in as that next generation.
Yeah.
So this has been awesome to have you on here and learn so much. This has been so good. As we go into the wrap up of this episode, I want to ask one last thing, and what is one thing, I guess, that you're grateful for, just being in this profession and doing this for the time that you've been doing it, but also, kind of growing up with it. What is something that you're grateful for?
I'm entirely grateful for the relationships that I've grown and have made throughout all of this, because we're a small community, and sometimes the relationships between people in this profession and the public are not great across the whole United States. Because of media and things that have happened in other places. And I'm lucky enough that the place that I work at in the county that I live in, it's not always we hate the police, we hate people involved with the police, but being able to be a younger person in this profession and the people that I went to school with and I've grown up with, sometimes not always making the best decisions. Sometimes they're like, well, it's just Kallie, so it can't be that bad if Callie's doing it and that she gets along with them. So maybe they're not so bad. And it's just one of those things that I'm incredibly grateful to kind of cast a light on the different side of dispatch. You don't have to be a grumpy old person like everybody seems to think you are. Sometimes we're young. Sometimes we just really like what we do. Mm-hmm. And, I'm incredibly grateful for the relationships that I've made and the, outlook on the profession itself that's been a little bit more positive because of some of younger people. And, we're still able to have fun and do fun stuff, and still be able to work with people we work with. Sometimes we always have to make bad decisions to have a fun time. And it's just one of those things that I've been able to kind of cast a light on the profession in a different perspective. And I think that that's one thing that I'm grateful for.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Kallie, for being on. This has been amazing to hear your story and just learning more about you and everything that you're doing. This has been excellent. And, to your mom as well, thank her from me and everyone else for all her years of service as well. Thank you for being on. So I'll be right back here with you as I go into the wrap up here. And for those who are watching, if you have any comments, questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us, and that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that is wttpodcast@gmail.com. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital as well as Rapid Deploy and Carbine. And you can follow us on Twitter. That is @91podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/within-the-trenches-podcast. If you're looking for any bonus content, you can check us out and support us here on patreon.com/WTT-podcast. And this can be seen on Facebook, YouTube, as well as Twitter. And then you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone, and we will see you in the next one.